So thank you everyone for being here. Today we have a panel of myself, Bob Morris, and Brenton Gicker from CAHOOTS. So good afternoon. My name is Geoff Clark. I'm an adult protective services specialist, along with 19 other direct service workers, 3 support staff, and 2 supervisors. We collectively strive to provide protection to Lane County's vulnerable senior population and adults with physical disabilities. We are state of Oregon civil investigators tasked with addressing those allegations impacting people over 65 and people with physical disabilities, both in the community settings and in facility settings. We have a total of 9 types of abuse, with neglect, self-neglect, and financial being our big 3. We are but a small corner of a larger web of services we collectively think of as a social safety net. So today I'm joined by Chief Bob Morris of Junction City Police. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself and your department?
As you said, my name is Bob Morris. I'm the Chief of Police of Junction City, Oregon. We work aggressively to protect all of the vulnerable citizens, not only in our city, but we quite frequently get reports from other jurisdictions that they're having difficulty trying to work through the case or whatever. And so we will provide resource information to them to try and help them further investigate it.
Wonderful, thank you. And I also have Brenton Gicker from CAHOOTS. Brenton, would you like to introduce CAHOOTS and yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Brenton Gicker. I'm a nurse and an EMT. I've worked for Whitebird Clinic's CAHOOTS program since 2008. For those of you who don't know, CAHOOTS is a mobile mental health crisis intervention team made up of counselors and nurses and EMTs. And we handle a significant portion of the non-criminal and non-emergency calls for service in the Eugene-Springfield area, primarily calls that are related to psychosocial issues.
Thank you, Brenton. So real quickly, what do we know about elder abuse? Brenton, can I ask you a quick question here? What would CAHOOTS
Sure.
be able to do with $2.9 billion?
That's wow, a big question. A lot. I think for us, the biggest complaint we get is that it can take a long time for us to show up if we're really busy. On some busy days, you know, if I'm working a 12-hour shift, I might come in service and there could be a dozen calls holding. So I think that the main thing for us would be to increase staffing and put more vans on the road so that we could get better response times. I think it's also a goal of ours because we've been working in Eugene since 1989. We've been in Springfield since 2015. But ultimately, we'd like to serve the entire county in some way.
Just the county, or could you serve the whole state for $2.9 billion?
I'm not a numbers person, but yeah, we could probably maybe serve this county and some neighboring counties and go from there.
So the reason I bring up the number 2.9 billion is that it's the estimated loss to financial exploitation by seniors in just 1 year in 2010. And that's on the low end. A study from Virginia Polytechnical University estimated that it was closer to 36 billion nationally per year. If these numbers sound lofty and out of touch with local realities, we can talk about what we're seeing locally. Bob, what can you tell us about Junction City, the police services, and elder abuse that you're seeing there in your jurisdiction?
Dude, I know this guy.
Fortunately, we see our fair. Sorry about that. We see our fair number of cases. One of the things that we are seeing is the financial exploitation, as you're just talking about. We just got through dealing with one person who was instructed to, via phone, to go to Target and purchase, I think it was $10,000 in gift credit cards, Visa gift credit cards, and then to scratch off the numbers off the back and text them to somebody. And the person did it, and within minutes, those cards had been cashed, and that person was out the money. where it's not going through a bank to be processed, the victim probably isn't going to get reimbursed for that money. And while this is a significant issue for elders, this is something that actually people of all ages. We had a sophomore at U of O that just did the same thing. She ended up only paying $5,000. But and actually the clerk at Target warned them, said, "Why are you doing this?" And they said that I have to do it because I'm going to get in trouble with the IRS, or I'm going to get in trouble with the law or something like that. And unfortunately, they come off as very viable scams. They sound very real on the telephone, and either the very young or, again, more predominantly, the older the patient or the older the victim, the more likelihood that they're going to believe it.
So it's pretty hard to convince those individuals of the nature of the scam.
Correct. And very frequently the elderly person is getting a phone call saying that they've done the crook has done some homework, figuring out what their grandson's name is or granddaughter's name is, and the grandson or granddaughter's in jail. And the only way that they can get bailed out is for them to go down to the store immediately. If they wait more than 20, 30 minutes, that cost is going to go from $5,000 to $50,000. And they are in panic mode trying to help their grandson, granddaughter.
So
family member.
I actually saw a news report. It was out of Portland, where the Clackamas County Jail, because they tape everyone, there was an inmate running that scam on elderly individuals, and you could hear them actually doing the grandparents scam. And they interviewed the people, and the people were like, "That sounds exactly like our grandson." It's so easy to trick people with the use of technology these days, and just really challenging.
Correct.
So Bob, can you answer me this? Does the government ever call people to ask them for money? Guys, we're getting a little feedback. If you could please mute yourself if you're in the audience, it'd be much appreciated.
No, the government's not, no governmental entity nor any public utility is ever going to call and demand payment via prepaid credit card. That's something that just does not happen. Your utility companies, if you're behind, they are going to call you and tell you they want their money. So is the IRS, so is Oregon Department of Revenue. But the big key discerning factor here is they're not going to request payment via prepaid credit card, where you have to send a picture of the credit card to somebody. That's the defining difference.
And once that money's gone, it's gone.
And that's a good piece of information. Correct. Again, if some kind of a fraud is perpetrated through a financial institution, they're going to be insured through FDIC. They're going to fill out a report with the financial institution, and they're going to get their money back.
So there's a lot of protection if you use kind of traditional banking, services compared to some of these newer services like Green Dot Money Card or iTunes gift cards. What would the government want with that?
Correct. And that's just not going to happen.
Awesome. So Bob, let me take a stab here and ask you something. I've seen a lot of the TV police shows. I'm guessing that's a lot like the usual day for you at Junction City Police, right? Start with a high-speed chase, catch the bank robber, wrap it up by the report by quitting time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no, that's not the case. TV shows have created a number of difficulties for us. Most of them are unreal expectations in a number of areas. One, the fact that we're chasing people down and catching people immediately. While Junction City does experience a very odd, near 99% clearance rate of person-related crimes, a lot of the property crimes we don't solve. If somebody goes off and leaves a pistol on the dashboard of their car and the car unlocked, then the likelihood of getting that weapon back is going to be real slim. Can you maybe go to somebody else? I'm getting an emergency call that I need to
Sure
take.
Thing.
The phone. Can you play?
Sure
and then we can come back and
you
finish
betcha.
this topic.
You betcha. Thanks, Bob. So, at APS, we work a lot, collaboratively with Bob, and we also work quite a lot with CAHOOTS, as these are some of the kind of first responders. So, Brenton, can you tell us a little bit about, your experience with CAHOOTS, responding to, agitated or confused individuals and, concerns, people wandering, things like that?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think here to give you some like good examples of situations we encounter with the elderly. Um, I tend to really like calls with elderly folks. But of course, elderly people are not monolithic. There's elderly people who are nice. There's elderly people who are not nice. There are elderly people who use meth, just like there are, young people who do. There are, elderly people with mental illness. But a lot of the times when we encounter the elderly population, it comes from a welfare check. So, say for example, recently I was on a call with an elderly woman, an elderly Asian woman. I believe she was from Korea, and her husband had died recently, but she was still living independently and doing really well. But she had a history of falls. So her daughters lived out of the state. In fact, one of them lived overseas. And so they would call her every night just to make sure she was okay. And this one night, they weren't able to get through to her. So they called the police and requested a welfare check, and that call got sent to us. And we, went to this lady's house and weren't getting any answers. And we tried calling her and banged on her door and stuff. And then eventually I hear this kind of faint cry for help from the backyard. So I get a little stool and look in the backyard and see that this woman's on the ground. Thankfully, she wasn't badly injured or anything. She didn't want to go to the hospital. She didn't need to, but she had been watering her yard and slipped and was unable to get up. And so she'd been on the ground for several hours. So, who knows how long she would have been down if nobody got sent to check on her. So we maybe, prevented the situation from becoming an emergency, and then, helped her up and, put her in contact with her daughter and so forth. So we get situations like that. A fairly common thing is, say the police respond to a situation. Like I was on one recently where an elderly woman, this woman was also living independently, very, doing well in general. She was having this hallucination of intruders in her home, and she, rushed over to her neighbors to tell them there's people in my house. And so the police showed up, wanting to, see if there was an intruder, and realized this woman was hallucinating. It was pretty clear to me right away. She had a strong, even though her home was very, clean and organized, and she seemed like a very together person, but she had this strong odor of urine. And I asked her some questions like, have you been having, difficulty urinating or burning with urination, that kind of thing. And it seemed pretty obvious that she was having, that she had a urinary tract infection that was causing her to be delirious. And thankfully, that's the kind of situation where, we took her to the emergency room. She got treated for that. I'm sure she went home and, resumed her normal activity. But those are kind of some of the situations we encounter on CAHOOTS involving the elderly population.
What about caregivers? Do you guys ever end up responding to caregivers in crisis that are taking care of vulnerable people? What does that look like? And
yeah, definitely. Sometimes it's kind of like the situation I just described. You have a caregiver, maybe they're a live-in caregiver, maybe they're a caregiver that pays, comes to visit somebody however often, and they notice something strange. A person who's usually very nice and pleasant is agitated or confused or that sort of thing. We end up getting called to assist them. I've been in situations where maybe a family member is unhappy with the conditions of a facility, so they bring that family member home, like an elderly or disabled family member, and then realize their medical needs are like way beyond what they can handle, and then they're overwhelmed. So yeah, we get situations like that fairly often.
And so in those situations, do you refer them to anyone? Do you send them on, or just say hope it works out?
It depends. If we think there are real safety issues, or we think there's some kind of underlying medical cause that that can be treated, we'll often end up taking the person to the emergency room, which may result in them just getting treated and sent back home, or may result in them getting admitted to the hospital and then placed somewhere where they can get their needs met better. Sometimes, we can just, talk people through things and call you folks for follow-up, if it doesn't seem like either if they're not willing to go to the emergency room and they have the capacity to refuse, or if it just does not seem like it's the situation is not escalated to that level, we might, just, talk to people and then, call you folks for follow-up.
Right. Thank you for that. We get some wonderful referrals and you guys are very observational, a lot of very detailed observations from your team all the time, which is very much appreciated. So a lot of times what will happen with Adult Protective Services is we'll get information from Brenton, or one of his Cahoot compatriots, or, we'll get a welfare check from Bob and his officers. Bob, I know you have something coming up here. Do you want to talk about your expectations of your officers regarding like a welfare check, or what the expectation is for them to put into that to assure that someone is safe who is elderly? You're on mute, Bob.
I really apologize. We were just really short-staffed and just had 3 emergencies come up, one right on top of the other. So I apologize. I've got to scoot. One of the things that we are looking for when we go out is safety is first and foremost. And while most people think of elder abuse as those people that are, in a home setting or in a retirement home setting or an apartment setting, we're also dealing with the homeless, vulnerable population that fall obviously within the elder community. Oftentimes, the people that we run into on the street have caregivers that have power of attorney, that have access and actually maybe full control over their money. So the ability for the vulnerable person on the street to experience financial abuse is actually oftentimes a lot greater. It sometimes is more blatant, but it also is a lot easier to track because we're aware of it. And we can track down who it is, and we can get a hold of senior disabled services, and they can start tracking the money, basically following the money. Our officers go out and do our best to make sure that we identify, one, that the person is immediately safe. And then we start working backwards, trying to figure out what has happened with the person, where have they been exposed to potential abuse, and what is that abuse? Is it from a lack of care, or is it from being financially exploited, or maybe some combination thereof? Little less than a year ago, I think you're very familiar with a case that we had in Junction City that, in my experience, was probably the most widespread and largest case that I've ever encountered, probably in my career. And trying to untangle that case with multiple victims was very, very challenging. And so when our officers go in, we go in at the very lowest level and try to collect very methodically, very, very slowly, comprehensive information from each person. The other thing that people don't understand is that these people are unfortunately the perfect victim in that they may suffer from dementia, they may suffer from some kind of a psychological disorder, some kind of a chemical dependency. So many people don't take them as credible. So they can go to their caregiver, say it's in a facility, and they can tell the caregiver, well, I'm missing $300. The facility may well not believe them because they have a history of dementia. But in fact, it is really legitimate, and these people are being victimized. And so this, in so many ways, is the perfect crime for somebody to perpetrate, and is in a form that is very difficult to prove.
It is, absolutely. Thank you for that, and thank you for being here. We appreciate you making the little brief time that you can. I know that you have a lot of things going on, so thank you.
I'm going to do my best to stay signed on. I'm going to log on to a mobile device. I'm going to do my best to stay here and be available for questions. Just given what I've got going on right now, I don't know if that's going to be realistic, and I do profoundly apologize.
Understandable. Thank you, sir.
In our next event, I assure you this won't be an issue.
No problem. So Bob hit on a number of key topics there, including the collaboration that goes on between APS and law enforcement, where many times we are, kind of doing two lanes of the same road. Where the police might be working more of a criminal side of an angle, APS is going to be working more of the individual, the victim side, and ensuring that there is safety provided and that all of the necessary follow-up goes on. Because after the police, arrest the bad guy in a situation, APS may be there trying to help someone set up caregiving with, maybe a professional company that is reputable after a bad caregiver has left the situation. Maybe we are working with a family member to become power of attorney. But Bob brings up an interesting point. As far as APS goes, the people that tend to be perpetrators of abuse are the people who are already close and already in positions of power. So it is daughters, daughter-in-laws, and stepdaughters. Then it is sons, stepsons, and son-in-laws, other family members, and caregivers. And that gets us to over 75% of all of our alleged perpetrators. So while it can be, the random person across town, and it certainly has been the door-to-door salesman that found a confused person that they could hit up day after day after day to sell them the same thing. They don't need $3,000 vacuums. More often than not, it is people in a position of power already that is already in that person's life that is trusted. Bob also hit on a key point where just because someone has dementia does not mean that they are completely lacking of capacity. Better way of thinking of how our cognition varies is similar to like rolling down a hill. And the question is, when do they cross that specific point on that hill of incapacity? It can be really different and it can be really difficult depending on, the specific nature of what that capacity is. Does the person have capacity to choose an appropriate outfit given the weather? Does the person have the capacity to engage in complicated business contracts and, make complicated financial investments? So it can really vary based on the different individuals and what's out there. So Brenton, I apologize. I'm going to pick on you just briefly here. Brenton, do you know at least 10 seniors in your life personally?
Yeah, definitely.
How about 20? 30?
I think it's probably a pretty infinite number. Maybe the number of people that I'm close to is maybe more around a dozen or so, but
more around a dozen. Do you know who was abused in the last year?
Couldn't tell you.
So seniors report elder abuse at a rate of 1 in 10. And in many of my, speaking engagements, I've shared with people that it's happened in my family. It's happened in my family more than once. And so seniors who reported at 1 in 10, that's 10%. So statistically, if you know 10 seniors, you know someone who was abused in the past year. So it can be really devastating. And, we look to, organizations, personally, I look to organizations like CAHOOTS and police to help us get assistance, when those issues have come up out of state, out of county. And it can be really devastating because they are people who are close and they are people that were in positions of power in the instances, in my own life. So if you don't know who it was that was abused in your personal life, I'd ask you to think about that because, it is happening. And if it's happening in my family, it's happening in lots of families out there. So at this point, Brenton and I are happy to answer some questions about how we interface, the different ways in that we overlap the services that we provide. I've got a few that were sent in ahead of time, so I can ask this, but if you have anything that you want to type into the chat. So, Brenton, who gets the call at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night?
Hey, can I interrupt with one other thing before I fly out the door here?
Yes, sir, Bob. Go right ahead.
Something else, elder abuse can be very, very subtle. Again, financial is a large motivator. And when you think of somebody being hypothermic, that means low body temperature. What degree of the ambient temperature do you think is the average ambient temperature for a hypothermic elderly person?
70 degrees.
Okay, but if you were to think of like you or I are out hiking, what's hypothermic?
Oh, just a couple of, well, probably 40 degrees would
40, 50 degrees.
Yeah.
And people don't think about that. So the family members, in order to keep the costs down, will keep the temperature down. They tell people that, oh yeah, they walk into a house and the average person feels comfortable at 68 or 70 degrees, when in fact, the elderly person who's confined to a chair or confined to a wheelchair, confined to a bed, and that is not ambulatory, that cannot move around, that person's going to become hypothermic much sooner at a much higher temperature. So the hypothermic elderly patient is in an environment that's 70 degrees. The family's doing that, thinking, maybe maliciously or not, but they're trying to keep the costs down because it's more money that's available to them and they can still get away with paying the bills. And that was something I was thinking of just as I was getting ready to fly out the door here. And I think that it's important because people don't understand that.
No, that's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Brenton, maybe you could talk a little bit about the effects of aging on the cardiovascular system and blood flow and how that affects, because I believe that you are a nurse as well. And so you have a lot of medical expertise about this and regarding what Bob.
And again, thank you guys. I'm sorry I have to jet.
Yeah, I don't feel super prepared to talk about that at any length right now. But elderly people tend to have less muscle mass and less body fat, which makes them more susceptible to both to hypothermia and hyperthermia.
Yeah. So, certainly if you're not mobile, that reduces how much your muscles are working and moving around. You're not generating as much heat. When I'm working with new APS investigators, I often talk to them about the rule of threes, which anyone who's a survivalist or outdoors person, usually it's 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. So while I'm certainly concerned about weight loss and people not having appropriate nutrition and being able to, kind of that downward spiral, somebody who is wandering in the middle of winter is like a 5-alarm fire for me that, holy cow, I need to find some safety for that person now. Can I get door alarms? Can I get, signs on the door or something, or caregivers to stay with them so that they're not found outside in a nightgown, or similar to your elderly individual who was, watering and slipped and couldn't get up in the garden. That could have ended much worse, even in just 5 or 6 more hours, and it would have been much more critical with that.
Right.
So while we certainly are concerned about all of those other things as far as food and water and intake overall, the shelter is a huge challenge for us. So let's see here. We've got, feel free to type in the chat if you guys have any questions that are burning up your minds that you want to hear from us as far as what we do. As far as APS goes, once we get a referral from CAHOOTS, so we'll get a message at 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning, I am so-and-so with CAHOOTS. And so we will take that information, we put it into our system, we look at it and make sure that it applies to one of the abuse types. Most often it is a self-neglect type of concern because it's a confused individual, someone who's not taking very good care of themselves. And so, then we will apply that to our rules and measure a response time. Most often it's going to be a next day response, so we see them. And then we go out and we make an unannounced visit. So we have a question here from Lori, thank you. How do you help elderly that are homeless and that are found by CAHOOTS in an emergency situation? So COVID has certainly thrown some curveballs at you, Brenton, this year, but I think it's hopeful and getting better for the next year, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has been, obviously devastating on a lot of different levels. It also has created some opportunities, though. I mean, there are programs that have been created during the pandemic to protect homeless people that are, if not elderly, medically fragile in some way. So for us, I mean, it's always a question of, immediate safety, and so if we're, concerned that somebody's going to, have really adverse consequences on the streets, due to the weather or due to their lack of access to facilities or whatever, then we will, go to great lengths to get that person off the streets. And there's a whole, network of agencies that we consult with around that, including APS, including, St. Vincent de Paul, including shelter care, including the mission. Right now there's a program that's administered by St. Vincent de Paul. That's to get the homeless, elderly, and medically fragile people into hotel rooms temporarily while some other long-term arrangement gets worked out. I don't want to say that the resources are adequate by any means, but there are some tools we have, thankfully.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question more directly for you. Has COVID increased the amount of situation that CAHOOTS hasn't seen in previous years? Has it increased the number of calls? Did you guys notice any change related to COVID?
Not really. It's kind of interesting because just different places have been impacted differently, obviously, and so when COVID, last year, when the pandemic first began and the shutdown first began and stuff, there's a lot of fear on the CAHOOTS team that one of us was going to get sick and unintentionally get clients sick, or that the clients, especially the homeless or the medically fragile people we see, were going to be decimated by it. And that never really happened. I mean, as far as our staff, we really didn't have any real scares, and we continue to have some clientele that have tested positive for COVID, but we haven't really seen a lot of people get really sick from it for some reason. But it didn't impact the homeless population the way we expected it would. And I think there's some kind of interesting perspectives on why that might be. I think everybody, we live in an area where people have been pretty responsible. So it was kind of anticlimactic in a good way, whereas, in other places you'd had, ICUs that were overflowing and, and these like morgues that were getting, erected to deal with casualties and stuff. We didn't have that kind of devastation here. And I think for everybody, police, fire, CAHOOTS, the local emergency rooms, it really slowed things down in the beginning because people, I think partly, they were worried about having contact with people and acquiring COVID, and they were less inclined to go to the emergency room either because they were worried they were going to get COVID, or they were just assumed that the hospital was so busy they didn't want to burden them. So initially it kind of slowed things down. Though we definitely got calls, lots of calls that were related to COVID anxiety, people losing their jobs and, contemplating suicide, people that are already, anxious, feeling, upset about the state of the world, young people. We saw a lot of calls with kids that would, were leaving home against their parents' wishes to run off with their friends, and then maybe, their parents getting, going out and trying to, drag them home, or in other cases, refusing to let them come home because they're so worried they're going to get sick, that kind of thing. So we got, COVID related calls, but it really didn't. I'd say in the beginning it slowed things down, and then kind of went back to business as usual, basically.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, for APS, we definitely saw a decrease overall. I'm going to be interested to see what the final numbers come out at, because our fiscal year ends June 30th, so we're about to get new numbers. But the lack of contact, and especially the lack of families visiting individuals in facilities, seemed to really impact the number of referrals that we were getting. And it was like someone turned off the tap in March when everything shut down last year. And so it's really nice that people are being able to see each other again, that they're able to look out for one another, because, while Brenton and I are a small part of this social safety net, really the individual's full, social structure is a part of the safety net, making sure that that person is okay and that they're going forward. So one of the questions that we had here was whether it is who to call, basically. Do I call CAHOOTS directly? Do I call APS? Do I call the police? Or when do I do all three? And so for APS, I would say you can always call us. we're not an emergency responder, so we're going to generally be out the day after. We're also Monday through Friday, so things that happen on the weekend are not always something that we're going to be able to address immediately. So in those scenarios, certainly give us a call, but if someone's in immediate danger, that would be a 911 call to the police, or a welfare check. Do you have any examples of when people might call you directly, Brenton, or is that all through the non-emergency line that you guys are doing?
Yeah, in Eugene and Springfield, and both cities were dispatched by the non-emergency police dispatchers, who are also the people who field 911 calls. So some of our calls are 911 calls, but the most appropriate way to access us is through the non-emergency police lines in Eugene and Springfield. Yeah, I mean, I think where we kind of fit in is that obviously if you think somebody's having a stroke or somebody's has a broken hip or something like that, then yeah, you should call 911. That's a person who needs an ambulance. But a lot of the calls are much more of a gray area. So say you notice your neighbor's mail and their newspapers. You have an elderly neighbor that you say hi to when you water your lawn or whatever. And you notice that their lights have been on for days, or their dog has been barking, or their newspapers and mail are piling up. That kind of thing. Where you're like, I think something might be wrong here. I'm concerned about this person. Just that you notice somebody's behavior has been strange. Maybe that, something that your neighbor, who's usually pretty with it, comes over and tells you something, tells you there's, that her, she's having dinner with her parents tonight, and you're like, well, you're 89 years old. I'd be surprised if your parents were alive. This is interesting. More situations where you're like, I noticed something is off here. There's something concerning. It doesn't really seem like an emergency, but that maybe this person needs some attention. Those are good situations.
Yeah. Thank you. So sorry that you're on the spot so much. Bob has, dutifully responded to an emergency, but what would it take to get some form of CAHOOTS in Oak Ridge? With the summer coming, we know we have a much larger volume of homeless individuals living in and around Oak Ridge. Historically, there's a lot of mental health barriers and conditions that people have up there when they are homeless as well. When you add to the demographics, the service of availability here, it can be very difficult to help people. And, Bobby, that's something that a lot of areas really see that's very challenging as far as making sure that, square pegs and round holes all fit together appropriately, and making sure that there are enough services. So any possibility of some outreach or anything like that, or what do you think?
There has been, I haven't really been involved in the consulting side of things recently, but there has been some contact with folks in Oak Ridge over the last several years, both I think the school district in Oak Ridge and the Oak Ridge Police here and there. The Springfield CAHOOTS program was able to get off the ground due to a federal grant for mobile mental health services. Biden and has been pushing this federal legislation that would require towns and cities of whatever size to have alternatives to the police for mental health calls and stuff. And so I wonder if something like that could fund a program in Oak Ridge. It's a pretty an underserved area, and also like a not a an area that has a lot of money to fund something like CAHOOTS. Maybe the feds could help get that off the ground. Especially if it's going to be some kind of federal mandate that places have these things. Yes. that might be some hope there.
Something co-located maybe with the medical clinic could be a really interesting model up there. So Bobby, we can certainly talk more. I got some ideas for you. I'd love to talk a little bit. So I've got another question here. It is my understanding that APS has to go away and leave the person in their situation if the person says, I'm fine, I don't need you. What are the exceptions where APS can intervene even when the person says go away? And does CAHOOTS have the same rule? So I'll go ahead and answer that first. So I'm armed with a pen and paper and some knowledge and a deep desire to try and connect people with effective services and things to help, support their autonomy and their ability to live safely, preferably in their own home or wherever they want to be located. I don't have the ability to pick someone up and put them in my car as much as I want to do that. I have to call paramedics or I have to call the police. And so there are certainly times when I've had to do that. And then I will express my concern to the individual, usually before that call, say, this is what I'm concerned about. This is what I'm worried about. You can tell me to go away, but until I'm completely convinced that you understand the consequences of your actions, I'm going to have a really tough time just walking away without calling someone. So a few years ago, I actually encountered an elderly alcoholic who had been on the ground for 6 days and was refusing to get up, very despondent, very much wanted to just die and pass away. The semi-confused but well-meaning roommate was continuing to bring the person alcohol at their request, which was not really helpful to the situation. But in talking to the individual, there were enough red flags. This person continued to talk and kind of made just some weird, errors, couldn't name their address, mixed up the street and some other things. And so eventually I called paramedics, and paramedics came, and they, I expressed to them my concern. And so they talked to this individual as well. And they basically said, look, you can either come with us voluntarily or we can call the police out here to mandate that you come with us, because they were able to articulate an immediate danger to themselves, to the individual, that they had been on the floor for so long. You could see the entire kind of circle radiating around them from the bodily fluids. And sadly, they had a very intense pressure ulcer related to being onto the floor for 6 days. And they spent several months in a burn ward after that. So, when it is very extreme and the person is, in immediate danger, I'm going to ask someone else to kind of get on that limb with me, someone who might have that power to overrule the individual or have that skilled ability to make that assessment. So, Brenton, I know CAHOOTS doesn't just take no for an answer. If someone says I'm fine, is that it really? Or, what do you guys try?
Well, we're kind of in an interesting position because, we don't have, obviously the police can take people to the hospital or, or jail, whatever, to, again, the police can take people against their will, obviously, if they, such criteria is met. Same with the fire department. They have what's called implied consent. Like basically if a person is, if they're so altered or so diminished that they, can't really they're not of sound mind, then the fire department can treat them even if they're not consenting, at least within certain parameters. But there's a lot of situations though where the police or the fire department might rely on us because that person doesn't quite reach that level. And so they're hoping, the police especially calls into situations where they're like, our hands are kind of tied here, but we're concerned about this person. We're concerned about whether it's their hygiene, their health, their ability to care for themselves, their emotional state, whatever. And they call us in hoping that we can compel the person to get care. And I'd say more often than not, we're successful at that. And we also, sometimes too, we even though we're not a coercive service in general, but there are times too when we encounter situations where we're like, hey, look, if you don't come with us, we're going to be calling the police or calling the fire department, or where we're just like, we're calling the fire department or the police. Sorry, but this is what needs to happen.
Yeah. So yes, Karen, the key is, does the person understand the consequences of their action or inaction sometimes? And if there's an immediate danger, even if they say, go away, I want to die, more than likely, we're going to be asking the police to intervene in those situations, to come out and see the individual. Some of that question is going to be, what is the immediacy of a concern like that? Is it, well, I'm going to pick the gun up that's across the room? Or is it, I'm going to refuse to eat for the next 3 or 4 weeks? So, how much of an immediate danger? Now, certainly someone refusing to eat easily could be an emergency 911 type scenario if, say, they are diabetic or even a brittle diabetic or have other, conditions that could really affect, how it is. Maybe they are taking medication that is too dangerous for them to just up and stop, that they will have dramatic withdrawals, that they will have seizures, that they will have, other really negative consequences to that. So really what we are looking for is, does the person have capacity? We certainly allow adults to engage into all kinds of dangerous activities. We let people, go skydiving and motorcycle racing. And just because someone might be in our purview over 65 or maybe have a physical disability, they may still want to engage in that dangerous activity. And, Brenton, like you said earlier, some adults over age 65, they continue to use methamphetamine or they use other street drugs. And, really that's a public health issue much more than a criminal issue, especially with the way Oregon is looking at things and going forward. So yeah, the key is really, does the person, articulate the understanding of the risk? Is it consistent with their life values? Is it, consistent with their overall level of functioning? And can they understand, a lot of people think it's poof, I'm dead. Well, simply, stopping eating or stopping medication is not, a poof, I'm dead. There might be a very painful, very inhumane scenario that goes on, when that person is withdrawing. So from those medications or whatever natural thing they are allowing to take them. I was just staffing a case with a coworker about someone who has, lost a significant amount of weight and is, saying that they want to die. Fortunately, they have a doctor's appointment very, very soon. And so my coworker is able to do some work in the background, and they are attempting to, talk to the doctor and see if there's a way that a referral could be made to hospice if it's appropriate. Um, so let's see, the comment we have is, so is it okay to let someone stay at home in order to die if they understand that's the probable result of the action or inaction, and when? The answer is yes with a but or no with a however. So, at some point the question becomes quantity of life versus quality of life. Is that person's life over the next 6 months going to be, magnitudes of time better because they stayed home with their loved one and maybe their beloved pet, or they're just in their beloved, location, compared to 3, 4, 5 years of a painful decline, suffering from, dementia, or maybe they're choosing to not treat cancer. Cancers, so many of them are very treatable. Many of them are not treatable. And we've seen a number of individuals, famous individuals who chose, some limited interventions. Steve Jobs from Apple, certainly he had pancreatic cancer. He chose some interventions, and then at some point he chose to stop those interventions and was very public about those choices that he was making. And certainly, with someone of his stature, there were many important individuals around him who, probably had concerns about the choices he was making, but ultimately had to defer to his level of capacity to determine, that he was able to make that choice, and that, the medications weren't something to be happened on him. So another question we get here, I called police, CAHOOTS, APS on the old struggling neighbor down the street and nothing happened, but what really went on behind the scenes? So for APS, what really happened is we went out, we talked to the individual. We most likely made 2, if not 3 visits. With COVID, it's been a little trickier, and we've had to, temper some of our responses and determine, when it was appropriate for us to make those responses in person. It's certainly getting better now with vaccines and disease rates falling. So I'm very thankful to, those factors that are making it better. We talked to the individual about those services that might help them. We tried to determine whether the individual could weigh those pros and cons and make a choice, consistent with their lifelong values. And we also tried to determine, was the person at such a level that they lacked the ability to understand the consequences of those actions or inactions. So Brenton, what really happens behind the scenes when CAHOOTS goes out and it just looks like nothing happened? Because we all know that it's a lot more hard work than that.
Yeah, I mean, we go through a very similar process to what you just described. Trying to figure out, okay, like how emergent is this situation? Does the person have the, capacity to refuse? And there are situations that we walk away from not feeling very good, because if the person is walking and talking and they're taking care of themselves on some kind of basic level, our hands might be tied if they tell us screw you and slam the door in our face. There may not be a lot that we can do. Doesn't mean we won't try again. Doesn't mean we won't, go to great lengths to try to, get them help. But, sometimes your hands are tied. Yeah, because like, if the person is, they're able to come to the door and tell you to go away. That's a lot different than somebody who's, so impaired that they, can't even do that. So yeah, unfortunately, sometimes we do what we can. I mean, we don't walk away from situations idly, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah, it's really hard. And, I've often said that true freedom is the freedom to make choices that are contrary to what others might make, and contrary to what your loved ones might want. But that's really, and choices that might lead to a poor outcome for you, that you have a right to engage in those decision-making processes, and participate in those activities or not participate in those activities up until the point where you don't understand those consequences and a judge has taken away your right, or you have been involuntarily hospitalized, if it's via a police hold, or if it's via police or paramedics taking you with that implied consent that you were talking about. So it can be really challenging working with individuals, but ultimately we're out there trying to offer choice, trying to offer support for the person to continue living as independently as possible, and to the greatest degree that they can, prioritizing whatever values. I've often said you can't have two number one priorities. So sometimes is the choice, safety or your beloved pet and one more day in your home. And if the answer is one more day in your home, because that's consistent with your life values, that you don't want to artificially extend your life essentially by choosing, to live in a bubble, or have aggressive treatment, tubes down your throat, IVs, significant numbers of medications, that is your right to make that choice as an adult, up until the point that you're unable to appreciate those choices. And frequently, if someone continues to make a choice going forward, that they've made throughout their life, a lot of times we're going to say, well, regardless of their incapacity, that person is making a choice consistent with their life values. So the example I give is someone with dementia who's also a smoker. Someone with dementia may not be able to appreciate all of the ins and outs and concerns about whether someone can be safe. Are they dropping ashes on themselves? I've met a number of individuals with a lot of burns right across their chest, and burnt shirts, burnt nightgowns, smoldered furniture. But that individual has made their lifelong choice to be a smoker, and so continuing to do that is something that they're doing even in the fog of dementia or acquired brain injury or whatever that is. We're always going to offer that person compassion and choice of whatever it is. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're armed with pen and paper, a lot of knowledge, dedicated staff who has genuine caring for the vulnerable individuals in our community that want to balance that out due to age or incapacity, or whatever their situation is, as opposed to, handcuffs and a gun, and the ability to arrest people and take them against their will, like Bob Morse with Junction City Police has. That it's really that social work piece that we're trying to provide to people. So we've got about 5 minutes left. If there's any kind of burning questions that you've waited to ask up until this point, I would encourage you to go ahead and please, get those in the chat box. We have just a couple of minutes. I don't want to leave anyone waiting for, wishing that they had had a chance. We really appreciate Brenton and Bob being here because of the challenges and the difficult clientele that they see and that they partner with APS all the time. Frequently I've been out and had to call CAHOOTS at a later date when I got a call and I was not immediately available to go back and see them, just as CAHOOTS has made referrals to APS on a Monday, and we have that trust and knowledge of each other's programs that there will be the follow-up and the follow-through. Just like when I send a report to Bob at Junction City Police, I know he's going to review that report, determine if there's a criminal component to that, and if there's some follow-up. And if he's not getting it, Bob's going to pick up the phone and go, "Hey, Geoff, what's with this report? It doesn't make sense to me." And then we can have that conversation because, we're all part of the social safety net, working to keep vulnerable seniors and vulnerable adults safe in our community and trying to provide them with some dignity and choice going forward so that they're not disadvantaged simply due to age or disability or the fog of dementia, acquired brain injury, or a treatable condition like a urinary tract infection. And reminder, great reminder here, Nicole, thanks for jumping in. If you don't hear back from us, you can call us. And, also, one call doesn't mean that you can't call us again. So we do have limits on how often we can go out. But if it's been over 90 days, we can go out again. If it's the same, concern, maybe the resource or intervention isn't working, feel free to give us another call and ask us. It is a challenge for us at APS to call back everyone at the end of our investigation and let them know that appropriate action's been taken, whether abuse was found or unfounded or inconclusive. Because after we've written that report at the very end and made that conclusion about abuse, we've got another 20 that have come in the door that we're working with as well. So, please, don't be shy. If you need to call us and ask what happened, I'm always happy to be a resource. You can call the screening line at 541-682-4140. You will talk to an APS investigator who does the screening. So it's people who actually do the work. You're not talking to someone who just does data entry and doesn't, understand what it's like to walk into a hoarded house or a house that smells stronger than they thought possible. You're talking to some people that have really been there and really can talk to you about what they see and understand what you're telling us. If you need to call me directly, I'm 541-682-7420. I will pop my number in the chat here as well. So just kind of last chance if there's any burning questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for everyone being here. Thank you so much for thinking about elder abuse. Please think about those individuals in your own life that might have suffered elder abuse. And if you don't know who those people are, it's a hidden form of abuse. And it's okay to say, gosh, through my work, I hear about these terrible things. Like, do you ever hear about that with your friends? And start the conversation. Ask people, what's going on or if something has happened. Brenton, do you have any final words of wisdom or thoughts you want to leave our audience with today?
I think it's important to familiarize yourself with the resources, which I think everyone here is doing. Be familiar with APS, be familiar with CAHOOTS, be familiar with what's available in the community when you encounter elderly people who may be in distress.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, everyone. At this point, I'm going to end the recording. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing people at our next Tuesday training, if you're registered for that.